This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
For this episode of Leap Forward, we sit down with Charlie Cook, CEO and founder of RightCharge, the B2B fintech that is simplifying complex EV charging payments for company fleets. Charlie details his journey from his roots in clean energy to pivoting his business model, explaining how their technology saves fleets around £1,000 per vehicle per year by optimizing home reimbursement. He also reveals the one trait every entrepreneur needs to survive the chaos of a startup: tenacity.
I'm really excited to be able to welcome to this edition of Leap Forward Charlie Cook, no relation, CEO and founder of RightCharge. Charlie, thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. Cook without an E. So yeah, different family tree.
Absolutely right. So look, first of all, why don't we sort of just zero in on RightCharge for a sec? Tell me, the classic, why do you exist? What's the problem that you're here to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. So today, we can talk about what we did yesterday.
Yeah.
But today, we simplify EV charging payments for any company that operates electric vehicles as part of their day-to-day business. So one of our customers, for example, is the AA, and they're switching those black and yellow vans over from diesel to electric fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
What we do to help them is their drivers have a RightCharge card, physical card they can use on over 70% of the public charging infrastructure, and that's growing all the time. But for the driver, that just means they tap it, all the cost gets billed to their employer, which is what they'd expect if they were doing the same with diesel. But what's a bit different from diesel to electric is that a lot of these vehicles, most of them in fact, go home to charge. And so actually now you have to think, okay, how do we make sure the employee is not out of pocket for any additional costs on their home energy bill? And that's actually where it gets really quite interesting and exciting, and where we focus from a technology perspective is on solving that. So we basically measure exactly how much they're spending charging the work vehicle at home. We verify the charging was for the work vehicle and not for a friend's Tesla or whatnot. And then that gets also included in the bill to the employer. So in this example, the AA. And we pull that money in, but then we disperse that money onto their energy bill. So as an employee, you plug in, you charge a vehicle at home, and you get a credit on your bill that exactly matches the increase because of that charging. So yeah, in a nutshell, we wrap up all public and home charging costs into a single bill for the fleet, so to speak.
Wow, that's amazing. And I mean, that I think we'll get into that, right? In terms of that, you're making the complex incredibly simple there. And I'd love to kind of unpack as to that must have been quite a journey to have got to that point, which is obviously the purpose of this conversation in many ways. And on that basis, tell us a little bit about the journey that you took to date to get to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. I'll go quite. We've got a bit of time, so I'll go a bit back if you like, and talk about some of the motivations, if you like, from my own background. There, I suppose, are two themes from my personal upbringing. One is I came from a family business, or family.
Mm-hmm.
My granddad started a travel agency, which my parents then ran. So you talk
Thomas Cook?
Unfortunately, not. A small local
Okay.
travel agency, which did very well for my granddad back in the 70s and 80s, when local travel agencies could make some decent money, and then things changed quickly with the internet and such. So, I suppose I've watched our family adapt to that change, which is interesting, but still small business sort of background. But that 100% was a huge inspiration for me. And, from literally as young as I can remember, I basically knew that that's what I wanted to do, was to build and start a company and run a company. Took me a fair while to get there. I played around, had my first business when I was 10, which looking after dogs that we used to leaflet around the local neighborhood, etc. But it took me until I was 28 to start RightCharge, which was really the first real business. And then I think the second theme is I've always just had a drive to try and do something that is positive in whatever way. it has an impact. So growing up, I think inequality, both in the UK and internationally, was quite a thing it was close to my heart and cared a lot about. I spent 6 months working and teaching in Tanzania, for example, when I was quite young, so 18, 19, which had quite a big impact on me, seeing that disparity in terms of living standards, etc. And after that, I then, at university, started learning about climate change, which I had no real idea about beyond what you learn at primary school. And that really kind of hit home. I've mentioned a couple of times publicly, but like the real moment really for me was watching a documentary by Al Gore called The Inconvenient Truth. And I watched that in 2014, and it was like, wow, this is a enormous problem and not taken seriously whatsoever by politics or even business really at the time. So I'm talking 11 years ago now. So that was a huge kind of moment in my life where I was like, okay, this is A, crazy problem. B, actually, once you dig into it, incredibly interesting, because we have to change how we do basically everything, including our energy system. And it was the energy system that, I was actually studying engineering, civil engineering at the time, and maybe that's why that really going to grab my attention. So you kind of fast forward a bit. I worked for a couple of years in particle physics, but that was a bit of a detour, and then came back to the UK and I wanted to get stuck into renewable energy. Ended up at Octopus Energy just when it was getting started.
Wow.
And then went on to be head of EV charging at Octopus during my time there, which then gave me all of the training, if you like, that I needed to go out on my own and start the business in 2020. So I started Right Charge 5 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So let's now kind of take, kind of from that moment on. So give me the kind of what was the moment that you went, I'm ready. There's a bigger problem here to solve. I'm going to start my own business.
It was, for the first time, I could really visualize what the business would look like in some detail.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was only really able to do that because I'd intentionally chosen to go with Octopus, versus another big company I was considering, I had an offer for at the time, because I wanted to get that experience to learn how you start stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I got that. I was very lucky. You talked before we were recording about luck, and I was very lucky. I happened to just join a company that went on to be one of the UK's greatest tech success stories with an incredible team. So I was in an amazing environment to really learn very quickly how you launch products, and that is a large part of how you launch businesses. So yeah, it was that experience of the EV space and the experience of launching products. For the first time, I could really kind of see, and with some level of detail, how this business could get started. It's not it's not what we end up doing today, and it's a journey, as you say. But it was that sort of clarity of vision, I suppose, that it was the first time I'd had that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, let's take that moment now to kind of talk about sort of the journey you've been on at Right Charge, and how and what kind of those seismic kind of shifts and pivots and whatever else have gone on kind of from 2020 to kind of here we are today, September 25. Pull out kind of some of the highlights and lowlights for me.
Absolutely. I started the company with a consumer focus. And my experience at Octopus had been all about consumer, so that was what I knew. We launched with a marketplace for individuals to get a charge point installed at home once they'd got their electric vehicle. A big thing I was working on at Octopus was just how you simplify that specific piece of transitioning to electric, because it's very confusing, or it certainly was in those days, which charge point you buy, who you buy it from, how much it should cost. It was very opaque.
Yeah.
So the idea was to bring a transparency to that process and some simplicity to that process, which I think we did. And then the second evolution of the consumer business was a home energy tariff comparison, because it's great, you've got your charge point at home, charge your vehicle at home. But actually, one of the things that we did at Octopus was launch the first home energy tariff that was like specifically designed for EV homeowners, if you like. So really, really low rates overnight, save you hundreds of pounds a year versus a standard tariff. And also you charge on cleaner electricity overnight. So it's good for everyone. But at the time of starting the business, that was also incredibly opaque. It was very nascent, very difficult to understand the total bill estimate, etc. And the big boys still don't really do it, like Go Compare and Uswitch and stuff. So we built those two products to just try and sort of bring that together for drivers. The next phase of the journey was probably 2.5 years, building the team, building partnerships to scale that model. I raised during that time 3 rounds, one of them very small to begin with, 2 of them sort of normal early stage rounds, both around 700K actually. So we'd raised about 1.5 million by beginning of 2023.
Okay.
And we just closed the 3rd funding round. I just had my first kid, so it's quite a busy time. And within about 6 months of closing that round, all of the excitement that we'd had because we were launching partnerships with big companies like CarWow, Mercedes-Benz, Money Supermarket, big leasing company, that all turned into anxiety because we launched those partnerships, and then the conversion of referrals, which was the model from the partners through to the website and through to revenue, was about 10 times lower than anyone had forecast. Yeah. So we were like, hold on, okay. We tried, threw everything at it, obviously, right, to try and fix it. But there came a time where we had to just acknowledge we were running out of time, ultimately, to fix this problem.
Because time is money, right?
Literally. Or money is time, actually. I mean, I don't know if that's an important distinction, but that's how it feels. You've got X amount of money, which gives you Y amount of time. And it was pretty clear that we needed to do something drastic.
It's funny they call it runway as well, isn't it? Yeah.
It is literally, it is, it's the amount of time you've got left before you hit the end of the runway if you're landing a plane. So we spent a day in a room, me, a board member and our commercial director, and I actually pitched like 10 ideas for what we could do using a lot of the skills and knowledge and network we had. And we all voted on the same one at the end of the day, and that's what we do today. So we all voted on this B2B solution, moving to supporting corporates or fleets as they transition, and simplifying the payment process for public and home charging. So actually moving us from a marketplace business into a B2B fintech. So quite a big business model change. But since then, it's just gone incredibly well. So, it's been fantastic since then. We can talk a bit more detail about, what we're doing today. But yeah, it's in a much, much better place, which is great.
It's amazing. It's great. It's great to hear. So yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about more about sort of what what drove that sort of shift, I suppose. What did you have to? I mean, God, that's a heck of a change in terms of how you describe the business, from the out and how it looks from the outside, right? And as I said at the beginning, also it seems like really quite complicated in terms of what you've built. In terms of that feels like a lot of plumbing and a lot of bringing together things that didn't previously hang out very well together.
Totally.
As it were.
Yeah, totally. I think that's actually a really, really good insight, to be honest. I mean, that gives us a ton of defensibility today, which is brilliant. So we're now deeply embedded into the energy sector in a way that no one else is. And we thought this was cool for the UK. And then we started looking at what's happening in Europe and USA, and we realized actually this is cooler than what anyone's doing outside of the UK as well. So right now, people could challenge me on this, but I'm pretty comfortable saying we have the most advanced technology for this particular niche globally, which is great for us, but also pretty cool for the UK. I think
totally.
We are genuinely, in my view, leading on this area, and I think we can back that up by the amount of demand that we have right now. European companies pulling us into Europe to sort of upgrade the way that they do it out there. So quite the transition from where we were. And getting a bit more into the specifics, like you say, it requires integrations into a huge range of different hardware. So obviously people have lots of different brands of home charge points at home. So we have to have the data integrations into a vast array of those to make it a very useful, broadly useful solution. We have taken the whole solution further than it had been taken before by also having integrations into the actual energy suppliers themselves. Obviously, a big part of figuring out how much someone is spending on their work vehicle charging is understanding how much they're using, but obviously what it costs them, and that's their energy tariff, which can be simple, can be flat all day. For most people it is, and it might just change every few weeks, every few months. But for a lot of people, it's actually quite complicated. They might have a day rate and a night rate for their electricity, or it could be even more complicated. So staying on top of that is incredibly important, which those integrations allow us to do. I guess the final sort of main integration we do is actually with the vehicles. So modern vehicles these days, very smart pieces of kit. And you can, as a driver, give permission to companies like us to read certain bits of data. So if the driver wants to, they give us permission to do that, read the charging data, and that allows us to verify 100% certainty that it was the work vehicle charging at a certain time. And it just makes it a lot easier for the employee as well. So as you said, sort of deep integrations into the energy system, and now that we're moving into Europe, only having to replicate that in more geographies as well.
Wow. And we talked a little bit already about sort of, the product kind of ethos that you sort of got from Octopus and the importance of that, the product is the business, sort of thing, point you made earlier. You've got, you talked about the employee, and obviously on the other side, you've got the employer. Tell me a little bit about kind of how important is the customer experience of what you've built? Because obviously incredible integrations and from a tech perspective, wow. But also what about from a user perspective?
Yeah, it's totally fundamental to being successful, I think. Octopus, I think you can tell from the outside, the culture is very much about user experience, customer experience for the benefit of your customers and retention, but also as a competitive advantage to offer something more than your competitors when someone's selecting the solution. So for us, it's also just as important. We have a couple of users, I suppose. We have the manager of the fleet, if you like. So it has to be very user-friendly for them. But then we also have the driver. And switching to EV, broadly speaking, once you're used to it, speak to most people, they say it's really not an issue. Great surveys regularly carried out on the EV driving population, and usually around 95% say they will never switch back to a petrol or diesel. So clearly the experience is good enough for people to want to buy another EV. But it's not perfect. The imperfections are enormously overblown by large parts of the media.
Right.
So we are constantly trying to tackle that, But there is some truth in it as well. It's a nascent industry, so sometimes things don't work as they should. And that creates an opportunity, really, I guess, for us to just be constantly fixing those issues, making it easier, making it more reliable. We have, for an example, we have an iPhone app. The driver of the fleet vehicle will use that every day. They can easily see all of the available charge points across the country that they can access. It's now over 75,000. Huge amount of infrastructure.
Wow. What does that mean in terms of coverage of the UK? Like, give me, like the classic mobile phone kind of stats.
Sure. Yeah. If the majority of the country, it is pretty well covered, right?
Yeah.
Coming back to that 95% stat, I think it goes to show people generally find they've got what they need. Having said that, there is a constant deployment of new infrastructure. I can't remember the specific figures, but the increases are pretty insane. I think it's at least 50% growth of the infrastructure itself in the last 12, 18 months. And that's continuing. And I think now, if you were to summarize it, you've got very strong coverage in the most important areas where most electric vehicles are. We do have areas of the country where there's more needed. So Northern Wales, outside of the sort of Glasgow, Edinburgh belt in Scotland, Northeast is a bit of a opportunity to build more infrastructure at the moment. So it's a work in progress.
Cool. Sorry, it took you down a different direction there at that point, but you were talking about the iPhone app.
Yeah, iPhone app, so they can easily see where they can go to charge. And then when it comes to the home charging, we make it as easy as possible for them to set up, sort of set and forget experience, so that they spend half an hour doing it at the beginning, and then after that, there's no need to come back and have to do any more admin. Yeah.
Set and forget. I like that. I'm going to steal that. That's really interesting. So, okay, so we've nailed the customer experience to some degree. Yeah, we talked about sort of, that kind of adoption and the sort of, the kind of relatively, I suppose, for the first time anyway, kind of high bar of kind of changing behaviors, learning new skills. Let's talk about kind of like that sort of part of the business in terms of how do you think about kind of like training, learning, upskilling, like what's going on in that part of your world?
So in terms of how we're supporting these fleets,
Yeah,
and
and even your own teams, like what have you what new skills have have risen to the surface as you've been doing this 5 years? What's changing? What's staying the same?
Sure. I suppose there's a couple of angles. One is constantly supporting our customers to help them upskill their own understanding of the EV market and ways they can solve problems. So we spend a lot of time working with fleet managers. So that's our sort of the typical job title of the customers who sign up to Right Charge. We host community events for them. We've got one coming up soon in London. So it's about getting them together, providing an environment and some free lunch to discuss certain challenges. So just as an example, the one that's coming up is around how they get their own employees excited about switching to EV. So they've got their own challenge in terms of doing the same thing and helping them to share that experience and knowledge. We've got fleet managers coming who are operating 7,000 electric vehicles in one company. It's a significant scale, and then others who are maybe 70.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a real broad spectrum, and we can play a large role just by facilitating a sort of the sharing of knowledge between those different players, without us really having to do much more than that.
Yeah. And also great insight for you, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. Helps us. We learn. We learn a lot from that. Learning directly from your customers, not a new idea. So that helps a lot. So that's the sort of educating on the customer side, if you like.
And how much of that are you doing? I mean, the physical, I love the fact that you're doing real world, bringing people together. What about, how are you using tech and digital in that regard as well? Like, what are you doing in terms of that kind of whole kind of education, onboarding kind of side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a data piece here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we do capture a huge amount of data from the customers that we have live. So we can use that to give proper data points to the market, to customers. And we can say, as an example, yesterday, we were actually running through a report from one of the larger fleet customers. Something interesting that came out of that was that they were saving around £1,000 a year on the charging for each vehicle because they'd unlocked sort of charging at home as opposed to relying on the public infrastructure.
Wow.
So that's obviously brilliant for other fleets.
£1,000 per year per vehicle?
Per vehicle.
So the guy that's got 7,000?
That's a lot of money.
It is.
Yeah. And even if you've only got, a couple of hundred, it's a huge amount of money, right? So some of that data can be super, super interesting. Carbon as well. We were identifying that they were saving huge amount of carbon by charging overnight as opposed to charging during the day or in the evening, because the grid is cleaner overnight.
Yeah.
So data technology, I suppose we're using in that aspect. Internally, as everyone is, we're exploring more and more ways that we can use artificial intelligence to support what we do. We found a really good application for that so far. It, as you would expect, is incredibly good at spotting anomalies in data. And as I said, we've got a lot of data every month. So we are now seeing that as it trains on more and more sessions for more and more months, we've got thousands and thousands of charging sessions for it to train on. It's getting really good at flagging it to us. So I think the technical term these days is like human in the loop. So you've got the AI, checks the data, flags to the internal team and says, this session here doesn't look quite right. Like maybe there's a gap in it, or it's, maybe the month's usage is a lot lower than previously for the specific driver, or a lot higher. And so that could be a number of things. Could be a tech failure of some kind that we can go and rectify, or it could be a human thing where maybe they're just on holiday and it's fine. Or maybe they are plugging in a second car and they don't have this integration that we discussed, and we can flag that to the fleet manager. So that's actually proving incredibly powerful. In terms of skills for our internal team, we so far haven't decided to create a new role for AI as such.
Yeah.
We're just making big efforts to try and embed AI and an understanding within the existing team.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting debate, I think. One of the things we're doing to do that is we have monthly an AI demo day, as we call it.
Cool.
Any of the team can volunteer each month and they come and present a particular cool thing they've done with AI. The rest of the team can learn how they've done it. And then next month, someone else can come and usually present something even more interesting as everyone gets better and the technology gets stronger.
Can you share any recent examples?
Yeah, absolutely. Our first one of the guys in the tech team decided to go off and improve user experience. Coming back to that, the way that the individual drivers validate a card. So they get a card in the post and they have to validate it. Once they get that, previously they had to type in a 12 long character string, which is fine. It's not the end of the
Bane
world.
of my life.
Bit of a
Yes.
bane,
Yeah.
right? And, this guy looked at that and he thought we could do this better. So he used a old school AI system, proper machine learning algorithm trained on visual learning, visual recognition, and embedded that into the system. So he presented it. It was live. Now every driver that goes through the system, they get their card. They put their phone over like you do with a lot of modern stuff, pulls out the 12 characters and it's in the system. And that was just one of our kind of random little projects from the AI demo day, which is cool.
And you got it into the business.
Yeah, by the time he was presenting it was live.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So yeah, we're doing a lot more. I could talk a lot more about that, but yeah.
That's very, very cool. We've talked about the £1,000 per car per year, and you talked about, the kind of the massive kind of impact on carbon charging at night. Let's talk about metrics. And I guess there's kind of like, again, there's multiple takes on this one, right? So apologies for my open-ended questions here, but there's obviously the metric, of you as, Charlie, the CEO and founder of this business, right? In terms of like, X number of rounds, three rounds of funding still in, sort of thing, and shaking of the thing there. It's, watch this space.
I can run out. Yeah, we can share more.
So there's the kind of growing the business kind of metrics, like what do you lock onto, what are your go-tos, and then there's kind of, as you said, expand out more around the metrics that matter to your customers as well. So I think that'd be really interesting to hear.
Okay, I think every startup should have this crazy number that you're shooting for, right? That you can say it and everyone's gonna be like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But if you don't have it, then
The BHAG.
more ridiculous, the BHAG. The way we look at the market is we're confident, as I said, we've currently got the most advanced solution. As I said, we're sort of expanding now into Europe. So I don't think it's ridiculous for us to have this goal of being the leading player in our niche. And the way we kind of define that is reimbursing employees for home charging. That niche is still relatively niche today.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the first time I would expect most, if not all of your listeners are hearing about this. But when you look at the numbers, most electric vehicles are sold to corporates. That surprised me, right? Like 60%, I think it is in the UK, of EVs sold go to businesses, not to individuals. And that's not uncommon around the world. So businesses really are leading the transition. And even in mature stages, companies still buy large part, if not 50% of new vehicles. So there's a lot of employees that need home reimbursement. In 2035, that number will be around 100 million employees globally that will be reimbursed for charging their work vehicle on a regular basis. And our goal is to be serving 10 million of those. So that is an enormous goal for us. But I think we could probably achieve that simply by being the leading player in Europe alone.
Mm-hmm.
And in 10 years' time, that's a lot of time, 10 years. So that's where we work back from.
Nice.
Today, we're not quite 10 million. I won't share exactly where we are, but we're growing very quickly. So I can share that, our revenue growth, for example, this year on subscriptions has been 10 times. So we've gone up 10x from January to September this year, which is fab.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
Thank you. And so I feel a bit more relaxed. Still pushing. The investors are listening, but a bit more relaxed. And our opportunity in Europe is huge, as we're, lots more conversations. So yeah, there's a bit of stats on our side. You mentioned stats for the customer as well.
Yeah.
Most fleets today have targets to fully transition by their governmental fleets, it can be sort of 2027. Sort of ambitious private fleets might be 2030. Others with good targets still sort of 2035. But that just means that everyone's doing a lot today because it's not an overnight thing. So it's a curve to get there. So the next 5 years are going to be incredibly exciting, I think. I think we'll see a huge amount more EVs on the road, coming on the road, than we have in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's an exciting time for businesses. But it's an important time to get things right. And as we discussed, you can cut costs enormously by doing it the right way, and you can cut carbon enormously by doing it the right way. So we want to make sure that every fleet is taking advantage of the cheapest charging, saving it's about 10x the difference into the unit rate between charging at home and charging on the road. You can pay 7-8p overnight if you're doing it properly, charging an EV at home. You would normally pay 70 to 80p if you're charging rapid charges on the road. And then carbon is usually around 25% cleaner overnight in the UK because we ramp up all of our gas turbines in the evening to meet peak demand, and then we turn them all down again. So you're left with mostly nuclear and wind overnight. So that's the best time to charge.
Brilliant insights. I love that. I think that as a founder, I'm sure you would agree that it's also about having a team to drive that growth that you're describing. Tell me a little bit about kind of like what you look for in the people that you bring into RightCharge. And how do you kind of then sort of build a culture that makes sure that they flourish and stay?
Sure. At an early stage, you have to find unusual individuals. You have to find people who are just naturally comfortable operating in chaos, maybe even thrive in chaos. I would say probably myself included, our leadership team. Not only do we thrive in chaos, I think we would not thrive in any structured environment. I think we'd be pretty useless. So you kind of have to find people who are at least comfortable with lack of structure, lack of certainty. You're out there building things for the first time in any role in a company like this. So you have to be comfortable paving the way. Then I think as a leadership team, in order to make it possible to operate in that environment, you really have to be comfortable giving people ownership and giving people trust. Because the worst situation you can have is total chaos and micromanagement. And then people just feel totally overwhelmed and throttled. Those two things are, I think, two of the most important things to encourage essentially just a very entrepreneurial type of growth.
And you talked about the demo days. What do you do as a business to kind of really, I suppose, sort of like make that kind of culture alive and be very kind of present?
It's a really good question. When someone joins the business, we explicitly tell them that for the first few weeks, call it a month, whatever, just to give themselves a chance to sit down and learn and be a sponge. Because people will come into a company, most companies, especially if they're ambitious, and they'll want to hit the ground running and they'll want to prove themselves straight away, right? But we find that giving them that time to just relax and settle in and listen and learn, it's a great way to get started, because that's like a kind of signal, I think, to say, look, we're very ambitious, we move very quickly, but we're also understanding of what's needed for you to operate properly in this space. And it's not always just about push, push, push. And Greg Jackson, who runs Octopus Energy, had a good phrase about when you're working this fast, it's not too dissimilar to being like an athlete. And it's about knowing when to push hard and when to push yourself, but it's also about knowing when to give yourself a break and take rest. And if you don't do that, then overall, over a year, 2-3 years, your performance is not going to be as good. So I try to encourage that kind of environment. And I think, do we do much more explicit to encourage that culture? Honestly, I don't think so. I think once people get stuck in, they just learn how everyone else operates. And it's almost, you learn from how other people are doing. And I think people get familiar with that environment, that culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's really interesting. And I kind of I feel like it's almost sort of like reverse psychology by saying someone, take your time, get ready. It's a marathon, not a sprint
Yeah,
sort of thing. It's almost like you start to kind of chomp at the bit a bit as well,
you do.
perhaps,
Yeah, you do.
I really like that. It's a really interesting kind of way of approaching things.
Mhm.
So look, you've painted a picture of kind of, a really exciting future in terms of the kind of the 100 million and getting to the 10. What do you sort of see over the next kind of 3 to 5 or whatever time frame you want to kind of see it as? What are the kind of major trends that are going to kind of help shape that?
Well, let's focus on the UK.
Yeah.
Given we're here in London. We have brilliant policy support in the UK. Generally, in the Western world, and particularly in China, policy support is good for the EV market, but actually in the UK, it's particularly good. And we have the 2030 deadline, which is after which no new vehicles, used is fine, no new vehicles can be petrol or diesel. And actually beyond that, there is now, which may be lesser known, there is the zero emission vehicle mandate, which was, I suppose, put together by the previous government, reinforced by the current government, so bipartisan, if you like. And that's incredibly powerful, because it is actually putting a number on the percentage of new vehicles that have to be electric every year between now and 30. So it actually paints this solid line up to 2030, gives the market incredible certainty. Um, there was a lot of worry that it was going to be too ambitious. There are fines for manufacturers if they don't meet it, right? So as you'd imagine, there was a bit of pushback from some manufacturers that are a little bit behind the curve. But the first couple of years, the numbers have actually proven to catch up. So the market is, broadly speaking, catching up. There's flexibilities built into it. It's a very clever bit of legislation, in my opinion. And I think we'll only see the market numbers become closer and closer to the target numbers. That means that by, I think it's 28, 29, you've got 80% of new EVs in the UK, new cars in the UK are going to be electric, which is already a phenomenal amount. And that's 2 or 3 years away. So the change between now and just 2-3 years is just going to be astonishing, I think. You've got super interesting dynamics that play out in that space. So simply knowing that new electric vehicles are going to be electric means that the value of petrol and diesel sales in that time frame also goes down. You can kind of map a forecast of petrol prices maybe going up, and so then the leasing companies know that it's going to be harder to sell those petrol and diesel vehicles when they come off their fleet, so to speak. So there's all these kind of like underlying dynamics in the market that will only mean
Further strengthen
the sort of feedback loop, which it's just going to be a very, very, very interesting time, and it's going to cause its own challenges. Like the public infrastructure we touched on.
Yeah,
that's got to keep up to pace, as does the technology. But I think it's a great place to be.
And what, from a tech perspective, most excites you right now?
Our own.
Yeah.
Wow, being a little bit facetious.
And your roadmap,
our roadmap. I mean, AI is a well understood subject. Clearly, there's very exciting stuff there. But let's talk about some stuff that maybe is lesser known. In the EV space, there's going to be some really exciting developments. EVs are generally thought of as a potential strain on the electricity grid. Actually, the reality is they're much more likely to become a really good asset for the electricity grid. The dynamics are that we're building loads of wind and solar in the UK today. And what that means is that you move from an energy grid where historically we've been able to turn stuff off and on. And we've built this system where at any given moment, National Grid has to make sure there's almost exactly the same amount of power being generated across the country as there is being consumed. So they constantly walk this balance. Now, the issue that has been introduced with renewables is you can't turn off or turn on wind turbines when you need to, or solar, right? They're either there or they're not. But the solution to that is you say, okay, well, that's fine. We'll just store it. So we'll store all that energy in big batteries. Now, you introduce electric vehicles, they themselves are huge batteries. So the question is, how can you store the energy in those batteries in someone's garage across the country, millions of vehicles?
Wow.
And then how can you then tap into that power when you need it? So, evening time, winter, sun's gone down, no solar's being generated. Maybe it's a quiet, evening, no wind. It is in the future, and not the too distant future, we'll be pulling power. We'll be pulling, say, 10% of power, of energy from millions of vehicles across the country, pushing that into the local grid, and that will power all of our homes, all of our factories, everything we need. The EV owners will get paid for that. They'll get paid a higher price for those kilowatt hours of energy than they bought them for. So they've got a vehicle sat in their garage that's trading like 10% of its capacity, which they don't care about. And they're earning money. And then they'll probably charge that 10% back up again overnight when the price is cheap and they'll wake up with a full battery. So this whole concept is called vehicle to grid. And the technology is advancing quickly. And within 2 to 5 years, it could be quite ubiquitous.
That's amazing. That's very, very cool.
It's super cool.
It makes you very hopeful, right? Which
Yeah.
is what, we try and make life all about, and why you started this business as well.
There's good reasons to be hopeful.
Yeah.
They don't get talked about too much, but there's good reasons to be hopeful.
Well, thanks for sharing those. Okay, look, going back to Charlie, I don't know whether it's 2020 when you made that jump, but what one piece of advice would you give him as he was about to embark upon his career into this sector?
Get ready. Buckle up. It's such a journey. You have to be ready for difficult times. You have to be committed enough, I suppose, which is probably impossible to know whether or not you will be. So whether that's useful advice, I don't know. But yeah, there's been 2 particularly difficult times of the business. So I think the most useful characteristic of an entrepreneur is tenacity, and then intelligence and creativity and all the rest is useful. But tenacity is really what I think separates successful entrepreneurs, at least.
Great piece of advice. All right, I'm going to hit you with some quick fire questions to end this chat. You could instantly download any skill into your brain, kind of Matrix-like. What would it be?
Blimey. Being multilingual, I still feel like a bit of an idiot, only speaking mostly English.
What language?
French, Spanish, Chinese.
Okay. Dream passenger, living or dead, to share the ride with?
My granddad, sadly. My past granddad, but he was my main inspiration. So he lives on through me and through my daughter, who's remarkably like him at the age of 2.
One piece of tech from sci-fi that you wish existed today. I mean, you're building it, so it's a difficult one for you.
If someone can use AI to build me a genuinely useful AI assistant, I'll pay them whatever they need.
You listening to that? Okay, teleportation becomes real. Where would you go? Back to Tanzania? And what would you bring?
I did actually see this one before, and my first thought was northwest tip of Zanzibar.
Okay.
Where I spent probably 5 of the most relaxed and wonderful weeks of my life. And what technology would I bring?
Yeah.
A book.
Ultimate driving song?
I used to listen to Jack Johnson album when I was a kid, so that's a nice throwback and chill.
All right, lastly, Marvel superpower.
I actually don't really know the Marvels that well, but is Superman one of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you can have Superman.
Being able to fly.
DC, but it doesn't matter.
Sure, being able to fly, pretty handy. Like, in a boring way, actually quite a useful way to get around. Carbon free, I presume.
I can see Right Charge providing a sort of drone sort of style kind of service in the not too distant future.
Sure, let's do it.
Charlie, listen, thanks a lot. It's been really great chatting to you today.
It's been great fun. Thank you.